the same brain circuits are involved in all the addictions. So we think there's all these different addictions. If you actually look at the addicted brain, it's the same brain circuit that's involved in all addictions. So an ideology that allows you free expression of your impulses. You will get to hit somebody if you're angry. You get to throw a window through a rock through somebody's window, or a verbal bomb to their personal sense of self. If you're lacking a sense of personal power, but the ideology gives you a pseudo empowerment, now you belong to something really important. If there's no meaning in your life, and the ideology gives you a pseudo meaning, if you're lacking genuine pleasure in your life, and you get the pseudo pleasure of connecting with people who see things the same way, an ideology can function like an addiction. And furthermore, it invites denial, just like addiction always invites denial. When I was in my addicted behavior, which I have been, I was in total denial that I was an addict. To me, it was just the natural thing to do. It doesn't matter what the cost was to the people around me. Ideologies can do the same thing. You're in total denial about the impact on yourself or on others. So yeah, ideology can function like an addiction.
And you mentioned the word meaning, which
Yeah.
really is a word that's come up a lot with a lot of our guests. And you know, there's a sense that what we're seeing now with the increased polarization, the chaos in world politics, is driven in large part by a spiritual void, a loss of connection and meaning. I remember in the book as well, you mentioned that's an aspect of drug addiction as well. Would you agree with that general sense that we are facing a global maybe void in meaning?
Well, there's an American psychologist who had that human beings are all creatures with special needs. And I think one of our special needs is for meaning. Our lives are not meant to be just lived for the daily sake of physical existence. Now, that meaning in a tribal setting is automatically provided for you because you're bigger than yourself and you belong to something greater than yourself. And when you're connected with nature, or you're connected with some spiritual practice or belief, you have some meaning that transcends your daily struggles for survival. Now, this society has pretty much reduced that. Like we talk about meaning a lot, and we talk about broad values such as freedom and democracy and so on, but that's not what people experience in their daily lives. Nobody experiences democracy in their daily lives. Mostly people work in institutions where they're told what to do, and they have no voice in the matter whatsoever. And the freedom is very often reduced to making choices between meaningless alternatives. So there's a deep, and there's more and more disconnection, as we've already mentioned. So there's a deep lack of meaning in people's lives. The addictions can certainly come along and provide a false, temporary, but momentarily satisfactory sense of meaning. And meaning is important to all of us. We all want to feel there's something more significant about our lives than simply the fact that we have dinner in the evening and we defecate in the morning.
On that point around this devastating effect, we've talked a lot on the channel, and some of our guests have talked about what feels like an increasingly polarized world. You know, the people are very entrenched in camps, particularly on social media. And, you know, we've also talked around how we get trapped in kind of fight or flight. Especially on social media, seems like a very reactive space. We seem to behave differently on there. So I was curious, can your work also help us kind of get an understanding of that, a broader understanding of how we behave on social media?
Well, first of all, what's the case in this society is that people are less and less connected. Human beings were not meant to live in these, from the evolutionary point of view, we're not designed to live in these complex, vast aggregations. We're meant to live in small hunter-gatherer bands where everybody knows everybody else, and there's deep connection between people. And that's how we've lived, for the most part, for millions of years, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of years of evolution, until really quite recently. So there's a lot of disconnect in this society. People literally don't know their neighbors. Neighborhoods are no longer neighborhoods. They're isolated domiciles for the most part, which means there's a deep hunger for connection, and the social media provides a simulacrum of connection, the pretense of connection. And so what do people have on social media? They have friends. They like each other. These are attachment dynamics. These are connection dynamics. But the friends aren't real friends, because real friends know you. And you're not afraid to show them who you are. On social media, people have concocted an artificially adorned persona. And it's these artificial entities that then people like. So the individual never gets the sense of being really liked, because they know that it's just their image that's being liked. And the so-called friends are not there for you when you need them. And yet use the same language. Liking and friends are very strong language. But social media is a pale copy of them. So the less it meets your real needs, the more addictive it is, because the more and more what you need to get. Number one. Number two, I'm not sure that it's caused, but it's certainly revealed the many subcultures in this society, and allows people who belong to various ideological groupings to identify one another and to band together and to have sort of a pseudo camaraderie. So we can all hate the same thing. We can all be hostile to the same people. And anybody can express an opinion. In the old days of letters to the newspapers, people had to be pretty responsible for what they wrote. They had to identify themselves. Social media, you can say anything you want about anybody. Doesn't matter how hurtful, how wrong, how hateful really, and not even identify yourself. So it allows people who otherwise are on the margins of society to aggregate in these pseudo groups that then promote one another's most negative tendencies. And there's no guidance there, there's no leadership, there's nobody to call you to your senses, there's nobody to say, really, do you really mean that? Is that what you really intend? What's really going on? So there's peer groupings without any kind of guidance. It's really like a teenage gang phenomenon where people band together, mostly for negative reasons. They're lacking contact, so they need to band together, so that's legitimate. But they band together without mentorship, without tradition, without adult guidance. And so we see what we see.
Yeah, and so is your feeling that in those groups, especially if there's a lot of hateful rhetoric in it, what would be your kind of immediate sense of what a way through that would be, or a way to reach those people?
Well, I don't know that there's a way to reach those people, except through personal contact. I think that if you take the analogy of the teenage gang, only if somebody comes along who can provide genuine guidance that these people will trust. But with the social media groups, who knows where they live? Who knows how to contact them individually? Who knows how to speak to them in a way that's compassionate and enrolling at the same time? That'll open up a different parts of themselves. So, but I don't know that the social media causes all that or simply reinforces it or maybe makes it more manifest. I think you've always had these groupings. They just haven't found a way to, at least you've always had such people, they just haven't found a way to reinforce and validate each other quite to the same degree as you have it now.
Yeah, I was very interested reading in the book, you used an example of, there's an area of the brain, I believe, called the OFC.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it mediates, in part, it picks up on physical, emotional cues, and that's a big part of how we trust each other. Right. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, that's something we certainly can't do online and can only happen face to face. And so, yeah, it sounds like to have these authentic conversations, we need to be in contact.
Well, you see, as you and I are speaking to each other, Ali, we're tracking each other's face. And our ear muscles are actually adjusting themselves automatically to hear not just what's being said, but also the tone of voice in which being said. And you will nod when I say something, or I might nod or smile when you say something. So communication is as much about these nonverbal cues, which are mediated through our nervous system, as it is about the verbal content. Now, none of that exists on social media. It's not genuine communication. human communication is almost meant to be face-to-face. And even if I were to write a letter to somebody that I was going to mail, that's a much more conscious and deliberate process than dashing something off on social media and pushing the send button in a state of tizzy, so that it's much less impulsive. So social media really takes away the nuts and bolts of human communication and provides only the surface manifestation of it. So what masquerades as communication is really diatribes very often. And I know what it's like because I get an email which might trigger me, and then right away I want to write it out and then push the send button. And boy, have I had to learn not to do that, because there's no reflection there. It's just whatever emotion arises, you express it and then you communicate it right away without any reflection. If I'm talking to somebody, as long as we're connected, by and large I'm going to reflect on what I say before I say it. By and large I'm going to be modulated by the fact that I'm talking to a real human being. And as I point in my book, what the addicts lack very often is emotional self-regulation. The parts of the brain that regulate our emotions, including the orbital cortex, just don't develop in addicted people because the conditions for development aren't adequate. So the brain does develop in interaction with the environment. So now you have a lot of people with brains that are not fully developed. They might be intellectually developed, but the emotional circuits aren't. So now you have a lot of people with emotional underdevelopment communicating impulsively on social media. And that's what we're seeing. And so people will say horrible things on social media that might never even say in real person to anybody.